is Solomon, and today I want to talk to you about ocean deoxygenation, which is the loss of oxygen from the ocean due to climate change. And this creates an issue of oxygen supply and demand. So oxygen is necessary to support life on Earth. In water, oxygen is found in dissolved form and is harder to extract than in air. So there are two key processes that supply the ocean with oxygen. Like in plants, algae in the ocean use the sun's energy to photosynthesize and produce oxygen. In fact, half of the oxygen in the air that we breathe in is produced by microscopic phytoplankton in the ocean, which makes the ocean a vital source of oxygen for the planet. Oxygen also enters the ocean from the air through mixing at the surface. As surface waters become warmer with climate change, they become more stratified. So that also reduces how much oxygen is getting mixed into the water. So warmer water holds less oxygen. So as ocean temperatures warm around the world, the ocean loses its ability to hold as much oxygen. And long-term ocean monitoring shows that as carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere rise and global temperatures warm, the supply of oxygen in the ocean decreases. So what is the demand for oxygen in the ocean? So almost every organism in the ocean uses oxygen to produce energy that's essential for cellular processes. For this reason, oxygen plays a key role in structuring marine ecosystems. So warmer ocean temperatures don't just decrease the supply of oxygen in the ocean, they also increase oxygen demand in marine bacteria and marine organisms. Climate change is causing an oxygen supply and demand imbalance in the ocean, both decreasing oxygen supplies and also increasing biological oxygen demand. Oxygen loss in the ocean is bad news for aerobically active animals. Some organisms, such as jellyfish and some squid, are tolerant of low oxygen conditions, but fish and crustaceans require higher oxygen levels and are highly vulnerable to oxygen decline. So there are low oxygen areas, and these are called oxygen minimum zones. And these zones are already present in the Pacific, Atlantic, and Indian Ocean. And these areas are expanding horizontally and vertically with climate change. And these changes are happening at local and regional scales all around the world. So these oxygen minimum zone expansions are evident throughout all the tropical ocean basins and throughout the subarctic Pacific. So in the tropic Atlantic, this has resulted in a 15% reduction in vertical habitat for animals such as the tuna and blue marlin in the last 50 years. And off of California waters, they've lost about 20 to 30% of their oxygen in the last 25 years. So, first we should talk about how ocean deoxygenation occurs. So, there's two main causes. The first main cause is ocean warming. So, areas of the sea completely devoid of oxygen have increased by multiple folds since the middle of the last century. And they're driven by rising temperatures. As surface water is warm, they absorb less dissolved oxygen from the air above. And because water is less soluble than the cold water below, that reduces ocean mixing. And that means less oxygen winds up in the deeper parts of the ocean. Warmer oceans also cause deoxygenation because oxygen is less soluble in warmer water and is more buoyant than in cooler water. So warmer water also raises oxygen demand from the living organism. As a result, less oxygen is available for marine life. So in the last 15 years or so, new research has shown that naturally low oxygen zones in the ocean are expanding rapidly, but unevenly pushing much of the marine life to an even narrower band of oxygen-rich water near the surface. So these deoxygenated regions have grown by over 1.7 million square miles since the 1960s and are pushing upward by as much as 3 feet per year. Off of Southern California, 650 feet below the surface, oxygen has dropped by nearly a third in some places in the past quarter century, and about 15% of oxygen loss is attributed to warming-induced decline in solubility. So, in any body of water that receives sufficient sunlight, plant-like organisms such as algae and cyanobacteria thrive. Clouds of algae streak the surface of deep waters and in shallower regions. In those shallow regions, large seaweeds and seagrass cover the ground. So these organisms form the foundation of local food chains, and their photosynthesis helps provide the oxygen that's necessary for aquatic animals to survive. And algae growth also depends on nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen. So while such resources are typically in short supply, sometimes the surrounding watershed can flood coastal waters in these nutrients. So this will eventually lead to what are called dead zones. So an example of that would be, so let's take it, like there would be a rainstorm, and this rainstorm would wash plenty of nutrient-rich sediment from a forest into a lake. And these additional resources that are in the lake will lead to a massive increase in algae growth, which is known as eutrophication. But rather than providing more food and oxygen, what actually is happening is providing a bunch of deadly consequences. So as more algae grow on the surface, it blocks sunlight to the plants below, and these light-deprived plants die off and decompose in a process which uses up the water's already depleted oxygen supply. So over time, this can reduce the oxygen content in less than 2 milligrams of oxygen per liter, which creates an uninhabitable dead zone. And there are rare bodies of water that rely on natural eutrophication. There are regions like the Bay of Bengal that are full of bottom-dwelling marine life that have adapted to these low oxygen conditions. An example that would be familiar to most of us of a region that is known to deal with dead zones would be the Gulf of Mexico. So for most of the year, the Gulf of Mexico is filled with marine life, but every summer around May to June, animals begin to flee the area. And pretty much what happens are the creatures that can't swim or the ones that don't make it fast enough start to suffocate and die off in very massive numbers. So from late spring to early autumn, there are just thousands of kilometers across the coast that become a marine dead zone, which is just completely unable to support most forms of aquatic life. But human activity, so that's an example of eutrophication. So how fast is this getting worse, and how are humans negatively contributing to this issue? So human activity has also made eutrophication a regular and a more widespread occurrence. Nutrient-like waste, rich waste from our sewage systems and industrial processes often end up in lakes, estuaries, and coastal waters. So, for example, the Gulf of Mexico is one of the largest dumping zones on Earth. And this area is known for having one particular pollutant, and that's fertilizer. So American agriculture relies heavily on nitrogen and phosphate-based fertilizers. In 31 states, including America's top agricultural producers, are connected to the Mississippi River Basin. And all their runoff drains into the Gulf of Mexico. And farmers apply most of the fertilizer during the spring planting season, so the nutrients floods start to occur shortly after. So in the Gulf, decomposing algae sinks into the band of cold salt water near the seafloor. And since these dense lower waters don't mix with the warmer fresh water above, it can take up to 4 months for tropical storms to fully circulate oxygenated water back into the Gulf. So this dead zone costs U.S. seafood and tourism industries well over $80 million a year, and that cost is only going to increase as dead zones get bigger and bigger. So on average, the Gulf dead zone is roughly 15,000 square kilometers, but in 2019 it grew to over 22,000 kilometers. That is the size of New Jersey. Human activity is similarly responsible for growing dead zones around the world. So what can be done about this issue? So one thing that we can do is prevent nutrient runoff. So in the short term, countries can set tighter regulations on industrial runoff and ban the dumping of untreated sewage into ocean waters. On farms, we can plant buffer zones that are composed of trees and shrubs to absorb runoff. But long-term solutions will require radical changes to the way that we grow food. Farmers are currently incentivized to use techniques that reduce the health of soils and rely heavily on nitrogen-rich fertilizers. But there would be less need for these chemicals if we just restored the soil's natural nutrients. And this could be done by planting diverse crops that manage soil erosion and fertility. So, solutions to reduce nutrient runoff can be tailored to local needs and economies. So, effective nutrient reduction strategies would include introducing legislation to limit runoff, and setting specific targets and employing monitoring to detect problems. So, secondly, and arguably more important, to reverse the loss of oxygen, we must all, that's private industries and governments included, we must urgently cut off carbon dioxide emissions and reduce ocean nutrient pollution. So warming-driven deoxygenation cannot be easily reversed, but it can be slowed down considerably, and this can be done by mitigating greenhouse gas emissions. So without a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, the ocean's oxygen inventory is likely to take centuries to recover from warming projected under either business as usual emission scenarios. So reducing human-driven warming by cutting climate-changing emissions from fossil fuel combustion can help prevent widespread oxygen loss and also enable oxygen levels to recover to a certain degree. And we need to better protect marine organisms to conserve marine genetic biodiversity and to allow ocean life to recover provided carbon dioxide emissions are cut. And now that leaves the most important question. What can you do about this? One thing you can do is use your voice. Call the state, call members of the Congress, call the state members of the Congress. Urge them to pass legislation that limits planet-warming chemicals and pollutants used in various sectors that cause issues such as eutrophication. Push forward laws that can help prevent oceans and continue to warm. Another aspect that you can do is to raise awareness overall. Not a lot of people are aware of the consequences that can result from ocean deoxygenation. And people are not aware of the rate of how fast it's occurring as well. The only way that this issue could reach a national scale of awareness is to start locally, and that can be done by taking the time to learn and understand how your local community is impacted by ocean deoxygenation. And if there's no ocean that's local to you, look for the most nearby ocean and near where you live and see how it's affecting you. Continue to emphasize the importance of ocean deoxygenation and to a greater extent climate change until certain barriers that prevent serious change from occurring no longer become valid excuses to continue and damage this earth any further. A lot of damage has been done, but a lot more damage can be prevented. I think appreciation and understanding comes with awareness, and with strong global awareness comes global responsibility to make a difference. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope this was informative and persuasive to anyone that is listening to this, and I hope you are able to pass this message along to others in the hopes that one day enough people will make the right choices and the right decisions can be made. Thank you.